4.3 is a bit of a breather patch. But you know, after the onslaught of new regions, a 5-part Archon quest, and a ton of really dense world quests, I'm okay with that. I mean, it's not like nothing happened. We got to see Navia recovering from the events of the Archon quest, and we got to meet Chevres and Chiori during the flagship event. Plus, you know, there's a few other things in there, so that's good. Gives people a chance to catch up. Like me, I'm people. I'm always behind schedule, and I really need these breather patches, thank you very much. Because, you know, next patch is Lantern Rite, and after that we're due for a Dainslift quest at some point, and you know, that guy's gonna deliver on some really mind-bending lore if the Archon quest is anything to go by, so rest up and catch up while you can. In the meantime, however, this video is my recap of all the stuff that happened in this version 4.3, plus some, you know, fun observations, trivia, and some mini-theories. And don't forget, we are recapping events here in this video, and that means we're going to paraphrase a little bit and shuffle the order of events around and probably leave out some smaller things just in order to make things easier to follow and understand. So don't be surprised if this isn't completely 100% comprehensive. But if you guys are ready, then let's get started. The Fontinalia Festival is basically Halloween if Halloween was a way to commemorate the founding of a nation that involved a lot less ghosts, which doesn't really make it feel all that Halloween-y, to be fair, but hey, you still get to dress up and go trial or treating for candy, and that's usually one of the best parts of the holidays, although I think I definitely prefer tricks to trials. Now, initially, the Fontinalia Festival's purpose was to commemorate the Loch Knight's search for Oceanids, and it has just occurred to me that they didn't actually give us too much in the way of context for all of this, so let me provide you with some of the historical context in Fontaine that the quest did not give us, because I'm sure more than a few of you are wondering who are the Loch Knights and where did the Oceanids go, why were they looking for them? So thousands of years ago, Celestia conquered the world that was ruled by dragons, and in the process they killed Neuvillette, and then they created an entity named Egeria to replace him as the heart of the primordial sea. Egeria allegedly created the Oceanids, who later grew envious of the humans that they saw, and they really wanted to live on land, so Egeria decided to use the power of the primordial sea that she had to reshape them all into humans. Now this pissed off Celestia, who sealed her away, leaving the Oceanids and their newly shaped Oceanid humans without a god. Because of that, the Oceanids became a bit reclusive, while the humans formed their own little tribes throughout Fontaine until the god king Remus arrived. He founded Remuria and then tried to unite all of the humans together in Capitolium, which was basically Remuria's capital. I use the term unite a little bit loosely because he was kind of just subjugating all of these tribes without their consent. So a lot of people just considered him a tyrant and wanted to rise up and fight against him, and that's how the Loch Knights were created. Their job was not only to fight back against Remus, but to also find the missing Oceanids. And they were really strongly connected to Egeria because the leader, Irenaeus, could hear Egeria's voice even though Egeria was sealed. So they were actually resisting him pretty well, and then Remus decided to go the way of Deshret and performed a very questionable act that led to his death and the downfall of his entire kingdom. That meant Egeria could be released from her prison, and she was therefore assigned the duties of the Hydro Archon by Celestia, and the Loch Knights were able to be disbanded because there was no more Remus to fight against, and yeah, these are the events that the Fontinalia Festival is celebrating, with costumes and candy. And yeah, I'm paraphrasing the whole Remuria lore a little bit, but this really isn't the time or place to go into a lot of depth about it, so I hope that context is enough for you to kind of understand the fundamentals. Anyway, nowadays this festival is more of a film festival, and we get to help Xavier make a movie about the Two Musketeers, a story about two siblings who became musketeers in order to get revenge for their mother's murder, which was carried out by their father. You guys remember Xavier, right? Like, he's been in a few film-based events now, and he was also one of the technicians on Surumi Island that was trying to fix the containment device for the Mikage furnace. Like, yeah, that's the same guy. I love recurring NPCs, they're so much fun. So Xavier lost his movie funding, which means we get to recruit some folks who will work for free. Now, luckily, Chiori, an Inazuman fashion designer in Fontaine who is providing costumes and makeup services for the film as part of her shop's marketing, had asked Ayato and Ayaka to perform in this film, and she's pretty confident they will be alright without payment since they're technically also in Fontaine on business. See, Ayato wants to work with Neuvillette on a cultural exchange between the two nations in order to build diplomatic relations, and participating in an international film collaboration seems like it's, in alignment with those goals. And of course, if we have any sort of performance that needs to go on, we have to get Farina on board as the movie's director, and I gotta say, I really think the role of director suits her. very well, especially if you completed her story quest and got to watch her agonize over her relationship with the performing arts after 500 years of playing a very agonizing role. So with Yoimiya assisting, the Traveler and Paimon taking care of the filming, and a prop master named Veronique, all that's left to get is a choreographer, and since the movie is about musketeers, we really need someone who knows about muskets. Someone like Chevreuse, a special security officer from the Mason Gardiennage and a bona fide bookworm. Now, Chevreuse is technically in the middle of a murder investigation, but luckily the murderer's methods are just like those described in the novel of the Two Musketeers, which is the same story as the film, if you've forgotten. She ends up swapping places with Ayato as the lead actor, so Ayato can go do politics with Neuvillette, which gets her a little bit more involved in the actual plotline. Chevreuse continues her investigation throughout the filming, and part of that investigation involves tracking down anyone who may have sold spare musket parts that could have been used by the murderer. She finds a lead that points her towards Flusandra, and once there, she finds bullet holes created by a musket, so she asks around for a bit more intel. And it turns out the murderer had stolen a musket, used it to make a replica, and then returned the original one before carrying out the murder. This gives Chevreuse a timeline and the knowledge that the killer knows a lot about how a musket works. Chevreuse then explains that she initially suspected the author of the Two Musketeers to be the killer, but ruled him out because he lacked motive. He was apparently adopted at 6, younger than the characters in the novel, and both adoptive parents were still alive. Plus, there was no record of anything, dubious happening to his birth parents. She goes on to explain that she sent the rainbow rose that the killer left at the scene of the crime to Emily, a Fontanian perfumer who said that the rose was a very particularly rare variety, a variety that was currently only being cultivated by the author of the Two Musketeers. So even if the author wasn't the killer, he probably had a connection to the person who was because they had access to his very rare roses. And then in a bizarre twist, Chevreuse confronts the author and he confesses to being the killer. He goes on to explain that his birth mother had actually been murdered, although it wasn't documented, and the man that he had killed was an assassin who had killed his mother. But Chevreuse then points out that in the novel, the real mastermind behind the whole murder was really his father, and there was no point in confessing to her unless he had succeeded in also killing his father, which he hadn't done yet, because there was only one murder and not two. So the author tells Chevreuse who his dad is and then asks Chevreuse to kill him, which isn't gonna happen. Chevreuse is literally part of Fontaine's police force. She's not gonna carry out a hit, so she just arrests him instead. Now, a few days later, the filming finishes up, and the original investor of the film, a guy named Mr. Morris, comes back to apologize for pulling the funding away from Xavier. And it's totally not suspicious at all that as soon as he shows up, the cameras start breaking and the film reels go missing and all sorts of bad things start happening. I'm being sarcastic, he totally did it. And remember, the author of the Two Musketeers told Chevreuse who his father was, like who the person he wanted to target was. So Chevreuse knows exactly who Mr. Morris is. So no, she's not actually gonna kill him like the author requested, but she will create a very elaborate ruse to scare the piss out of him in one of the best cutscenes for an event that I have ever seen in this game. I mean, the lighting, the camera angles, the manufactured drama. It was so good. I loved this scene. But this is also where the twist is. Because not only is Morris the father of the novelist, but the novelist had a sibling, just like they did in the book. And it was none other than Veronique, our prop master. She was the real musketeer and the one who killed the assassin who killed her and her brother's mother, and she intended to also kill their father. And I really understand why, because Morris is a real piece of dung. He paid their mother to get rid of her kids, and when she told him that she didn't do that, years later, he paid someone to hunt her down and kill her so that she didn't get in the way of his recent engagement to a rich heiress. And so when he heard about the novel that was based on his misdeeds getting made into a movie and therefore about to get really popular and widespread, he pretended to be an investor and pulled funding at the very last minute so it would not get made. And when it did get made, he tried to sabotage it. So I totally understand Veronique's motivations. I sympathize with her plight and her pain and everything else, and it's really, really, really easy to hate Morris and to want him dead and to say he deserves it, an eye for an eye and all that jazz. But this is where the moral of this whole patch kind of comes in. See, justice means different things to different people. And the one who gets to decide what justice means in any incident is the one who has power over the situation. And in this case, it's not Veronique who has power over this current situation. It's Chevreuse. So Chevreuse is the one who gets to decide what justice means in this moment. And Chevreuse decides not to kill him, because although she sympathizes with his victims, she believes that solving a crime with another crime isn't the right choice. Both Veronique and Mr. Morris were responsible for the death of another person. So objectively speaking, they're both murderers. So it should be up to the justice system to decide what their fates should be, not the emotions of the individuals. Is this the correct call? It's impossible to say because, like I said, justice means different things to different people. And this just so happens to be what justice means to Chevreuse, and she's the one who gets to choose in this case. But there's one additional takeaway from this quest. See, while the story of the two musketeers has a somewhat happy ending with the siblings succeeding in killing their father, the reality ended with both of them incarcerated. Not exactly the satisfying ending you would expect from a book. But that's kind of the point. That's what the writers are really trying to hammer home here. Their point is that reality is different from fiction, and Chevreuse explains this so well when she says,
"Romanticism is what gives works of art their appeal. Fiction is able to explore means of restitution that could never work in real life. Just like the real world, the world of stories also has its own set of rules and justice. These different possibilities are what initially drew me to reading in the first place."
I feel like this lesson in particular is so important, especially these days. Choices made in reality have real consequences that can't be undone, and that's why we try to live our life in a very thoughtful way. We've only got the one shot at it. But stories are different. Stories allow us to experience alternate choices, different scenarios, and potential outcomes. By doing this, stories help us learn more about ourselves and help us grow as individuals by giving us a safe and vicarious means with which to sympathize with the circumstances of other people, whether we think like them or not. And as we saw with Fremine in the last version, they can also be a way to gain closure and to help us heal. This is why stories are so powerful and why you can still love a story or a character for what you can learn from them and for the emotions that they let you feel. You don't have to be like those characters, and you don't have to agree with their choices or actions. That's the beauty of a story. Chevreuse knows this really well, and that's why she can love the characters and enjoy the ending of the Two Musketeers even while believing that they made the wrong choice and committed the crime of murder, the same one that their father committed. She could feel their pain when they lost their mother. She could feel their relief when they killed their father, and she understood them by the end of the story. So even if she believes that those characters were wrong and that she, if put in the same position, would do things differently, the experience that their story gave her was important to her, and it should be cherished. And I just think this is a really important thing for us to remember. Oh, and the Two Musketeers won the film festival, so congratulations, Xavier! We spent so much time with Navia in the Archon quest that it actually felt really weird not to see her during the Fontanalia festival, especially since she played the role of detective. And, you know, the whole festival we were playing the role of detective again. It just seems like this would have been right up her alley, but oh well, we got her story quest at least. And since Navia is from Poisson and Poisson got destroyed in the Archon quest, it means it's time to rebuild Poisson. Well, kind of. I mean, that's not really what we're doing in the quest, although it's going on in the background. We're actually playing detective, once again trying to figure out why an aquabus line was never constructed between the Court of Fontaine and Poisson. Because it is kind of weird when you think about it. After all, the Spina di Rosula was responsible for building the aquabus lines in the first place, and their headquarters is in Poisson, so why not prioritize a line there? And speaking of priorities, the quest wants us to prioritize designing a commemorative statue of Navia's parents for the time being. You know, now that Callus's name has been cleared of murder charges, all his good deeds can finally be celebrated and remembered openly. Which brings us to this new guy named Coulter. Now, Coulter is a Spina member who was serving time in Meripede during the events of the Archon quest. He was a really good friend of Melus, so he's understandably upset to hear of his passing and of Marcel's betrayal. You guys remember Marcel, right? He was the guy dissolving women and selling synth to people. Well, anyway, Coulter says he's really worried that Marcel may have had accomplices that are still out there plotting against the Spina. He explains that a guy named Romeu, who he suspects of being an accomplice of Marcel, had a dispute with Callus years ago during the initial construction of the Aquabus lines. Now, Romeu thought it would be better to use the funds allocated for the Aquabus lines to improve the city of Poissant instead, but Callus disagreed, saying that the relationships with the other factions would be forged by the construction of the Aquabus lines, and that was far more valuable in the long run. Romeu then left the Spina over this disagreement, and the two never reconciled. It didn't help that Clementine, Navia's mother, was supposed to be the mediator between the two, but she was pregnant with Navia at the time, so she was accused of being more biased towards Callus since he was the father. And when she died during childbirth, Callus became even more determined to see the Aquabus project through in order to honor her. So anyway, Coulter decides to accompany us back to the court of Fontaine to pick up a gift for a young, aspiring Spina member, and wouldn't you know it, some suspicious people are following us and they want revenge. So, it goes without saying that these guys are Romeu's followers. What convenient timing. And then there's Navia here with her heart of gold, willing to extend an olive branch and talk reconciliation with Romeu and all his little goons. And yeah, okay, it's less about her being good-hearted and more about Navia trying to do what she believes is the right thing, because that's how you protect the people you care about most. Letting old grudges fester only breeds more resentment, and that can lead to violence, and no one wants more violence. And this philosophy of Navia's gets proven right away because this 20-year grudge of Romeu's somehow makes him think that setting up explosives around the Clementine line and blowing it up is a great idea. Like, sure, they were pissed thinking Clementine was biased against them, but the Aquabus line is a public service now. It's already built. Clementine's dead. It's over, man. Just let it go. This revenge is only gonna hurt the city you wanted to protect because the rubble from the explosion's gonna hit Poissant and, people could die. But what can you do? Grudges make people irrational and illogical. Case in point, Coulter then tries to stab Navia, cause he's also got a grudge against her specifically. He blames her for the deaths of Silver, Malus, Clementine, and Callus, as well as the downfall of the Spina di Rosula itself. But Navia has no tolerance for this sort of thing. If the other party isn't willing to negotiate, then neither is she, and she will strike them down swiftly and decisively because if she doesn't, more people around her will get hurt, and she does not want that. So in the end, Navia's quest really highlights what it means to be a leader, having to make really tough decisions and having to deal with the aftermath of the choices of the people who came before you, and having to carry the trust and hopes of the people who put their faith in you today. And also, knowing that you won't always make the right choice or get the best outcomes. You just have to deal with that. Navia's carrying on a legacy, and it's not a flawless one, but it's definitely one full of lessons that she'll need in order to work towards a better future. It's gonna be really hard, and Navia won't always cope well, but she's got the support of the people around her. She's not alone. She and Poissant are gonna be just fine. But I do wonder if we're actually going to see the final statue. Like, are they actually going to put it in Poissant somewhere? If so, where? Did you guys know that Euphrasia has a new quest for us in this patch? Because it didn't have a map indicator, it was just like a dialogue prompt. And it's a pretty short quest, but boy, do you get taken for a bit of a ride. So basically, she has this commission for us to go help out an elderly gentleman named Leroy with some basic chores. Sounds easy, right? Wrong. He seems like a really cool dude at first. Like, he's got this sweet little girl named Molly who he gives snacks to and lets her play with his cat, so overall he just comes off as a nice guy. But then his daughter and her husband show up and things take a bit of a weird turn. She and her husband lock him up in the house and they're like really hostile to us, which makes you think that they're committing something like elder abuse, yeah? I mean, that is why we help him escape captivity, but shortly after this, his son-in-law, Athos, catches up with us and he lets us in on a bit of a secret, which really isn't so much a secret as it is the truth of the matter. Turns out this daughter of his that he says he adopted 6 months ago, which is super weird because who adopts a married adult woman as an elderly man? But she's actually a relative of his named Autumn, who he really did adopt, but like a lot longer ago when she was a child. And the two of them lived in Flusandra, and they weren't exactly well off, so when Leroy got the opportunity to marry her off to a rich elderly man from the court of Fontaine, he took it. He married her off without her consent. And of course, the old man died a few years after this marriage, and he left Autumn with a very sizable inheritance that Leroy took from her. And then he married her off again to another dude without her consent. And this guy was abusive and awful. Poor Autumn was forced to endure all of this and also bear his child. And when she finally couldn't take it anymore, she killed him. She was found guilty at her trial, and her daughter was put into Leroy's care. But Autumn wanted to be with her daughter, so she managed to somehow break out of Maripede, which is a hell of an accomplishment, in order to reunite with her daughter, only to discover that Leroy had foisted the kid off onto some wealthy couple. And now Autumn has no idea where she is. So it's no wonder Autumn would want to get revenge against him for just ruining her life and taking her daughter away from her. And unlike the events from Roses and Muskets, Autumn actually does get to kill him in the end. There's no Chevres to stop her in this story. And afterwards, Autumn discovers that the little girl Molly, who used to visit Leroy all the time, was her daughter, the one Leroy gave to another family. She also learns that her daughter is happy, healthy, and part of a loving home. So Autumn doesn't tell her that she's her mother, although she has every intention of supporting her from the shadows. Molly's happiness is what matters most to her, after all. This quest has that brand of dark justice that kind of flies in the face of the whole do the right thing and end the cycle of violence messages that we got from the other two quests this patch. Autumn did not end the cycle of violence necessarily, perhaps because the option of putting him through the justice system just wasn't available to her since she herself was a criminal. I kind of like how this plays out though, because even though the messages between the three quests that we have are in conflict with each other, it actually just furthers the idea that the concept of justice is complicated, and sometimes there isn't a clear difference between the right choice and the wrong one. It's never black and white, and that is again why stories are so useful. We get to explore all of these possibilities and different circumstances, and we get to ask ourselves, what would we do if we were in this situation? And that, in turn, helps shape our notion of justice. I don't really have a lot to say about the Beetle Brawl event, because it's not really like it had a ton of lore or anything. But there were a couple of things that stood out to me. This is Ito's second trip to Liyue, the first taking place all the way back in version 2.7's Perilous Trail quest, and both trips so far have involved him getting, well, involved with the Adepti. This time around, he was training to compete against Guoba, only to learn that Guoba's incredibly powerful beetle was made by Cloud Retainer, and now Ito is determined to become Cloud Retainer's apprentice or student or something. Now, events rarely carry a lot of canonical story progression, but I do wonder if this event is kind of like a hint towards Ito actually working towards learning adeptal arts. Because if events do anything, they usually either give us some contextual lore that we're going to learn later on, or they tend to foreshadow future events. So in this case, even though this is kind of a throwaway event, sort of, it does still kind of feel like it could be foreshadowing for a second story quest plotline for Ito. I mean, his first quest was about, reconciling the differences between the red Oni and the blue Oni, so what if his second quest is about creating new ties with the Liyue Adepti and the yokai? Because, he should be a yokai, right? I'm assuming he is. And I've had this theory for a long time, and I'm probably not the first or the only person to have this theory, that the yokai and the adepti are basically the same type of life form, or at least super similar. Because, they're all kind of illuminated beasts of sorts. And we already have seen some cross-cultural magic being shared between Inazuma and Liyue all the way back during the Labyrinth Warrior event, so I don't think the idea is without merit. Now, I know this is kinda speculative and doesn't really have a solid basis, but I think it would make for a really interesting character development arc for him. And I also think Cloud Retainer would be kind of fond of him and really enjoy teaching him things, even if he would probably be a pretty frustrating student. After all, he kinda wants to learn all the mechanical stuff, right? So far, all of her students have wanted to learn combat techniques. Ito might want to learn mechanical stuff in order to make his beetles fight better, and I suppose that's a type of combat technique, but it's not quite the same thing as the stuff that Ganyu and Shinha go through. Anyway, it's just fun food for thought, I guess. Oh, and speaking of both beetles and food for thought, I was overthinking Ito's obsession with beetle battling recently. Because, I know that insect fights are pretty common in certain areas of Japan and China, but I've always wondered why Hoyo went this route for him. Beyond it kind of being a Pokemon reference as well. And I'm sure someone else has noticed this before, but it just kind of hit me that Ito is an Oni, and his cow is named Ushi, and we know that Ushi is probably named off of the Ushi Oni, which was an ox demon with clawed spider legs. But even though these demons are kind of described as having spider bodies and spider legs, they only have 6 legs, not 8. Spiders need 8. So if they have 6 legs, then they're 6-legged horned insect demons like beetles, if beetles were demons. And then I had the incredibly cursed thought that a female beetle ox would be a beetle cow, which might make beetle milk, beetle milk, beetle milk. Get it? Because it's beetle juice? I might be a little overtired. As far as actual lore goes within this quest, it probably all comes down to Guoba, and even then there's not a whole lot there. But I do think it's very interesting that Guoba is really happy to see the Bishop, the crystal tornado. But the Bishop either doesn't like Guoba or is scared of Guoba. Probably the second one. But I was kind of wondering if Guoba was so happy to see the Bishop because he associates the Bishop hatchling with Ajdaha. Because Guoba and Ajdaha should have been mutual friends through Zhongli at the very least, right? And we know that Guoba's memories are a little bit messed up because, he lost a lot of them when he shrunk down. So if that's the case, then that is both really sweet and also very sad. Okay, well that just about does it for the quests this patch, but hey, I still have a few more things I want to add, so don't go anywhere just yet. I've got some little bits of lore that I like to call Lorebits. It's the most original name ever, I know. Let's get into them. Okay, so last patch we actually got the Gilded Dreams TCG card, and I completely forgot about it. Now, typically these artifact cards depict the main character that was featured in the artifact's lore, and since Gilded Dreams is about King Deshret, well, this could be a depiction of King Deshret. But it's probably not. While Gilded Dreams does focus on all the stuff that Deshret did, it frames those stories as legends that tribes of humans tell each other. So in The Clock, there's this line that reads, "Imitating the God King's appearance, the feudal states also recalled the days long past when they had kings and priests." And then one of the TCG cards, as well as the crown of this set, goes on to say, "Once the wise mortal king and the clergy received divine oracles personally, and they were the masters of the land. Today, those who rule as proxies in the oases are the shadows of the gods." So I've taken this to mean that the outfit is probably what Deshret would have worn, or something like it. But the person depicted there is either most likely a priest or a mortal king. I mean, it's possible that this is depicting Deshret, but I kind of think it's unlikely. There was also another pair of cards released this patch for Vorukasha's Glow. This set is about how the Goddess of Flowers created the Simurgh, and I got really excited because holy cow, is this actually the Goddess of Flowers, Nabu Malikata? Well, just like with the Gilded Dreams set, the jury's still out on this one. Because the set is about Nabu Malikata, but it's about how Nabu Malikata created the Simurgh. And for those of you who don't know, the Simurgh wasn't always a bird. The set deliberately calls the Simurgh the daughter of the Goddess of Flowers, who was left in the care of Rukkhadevata, and it was Rukkhadevata who transformed her into a bird, the Simurgh. So it's equally possible that this is a depiction of the Simurgh pre-birdification or a depiction of Nabu Malikata, but I'm inclined to say it's probably the Simurgh, although it pains me to do this because I really wanted the Goddess of Flowers to be based on Alicia from Honkai Impact. But the problem is the woman on the card face doesn't have any horns. Remember, Nilu's dancer outfit was said to be based on descriptions of Nabu Malikata, and Nilu's veil has horns, 2 sets of them, actually. And I know this is such a small thing, but this is the biggest difference between the 2 outfits besides Nilu's being blue instead of pink. The necklace is similar, the chain around the head is similar, the veil, the pattern, the style of top, the armbands, everything else matches except the horns and the coloring. But here's the thing, it might not matter who it is. See, it's very possible that the daughters of the goddess of flowers would inherit traits from their mother, meaning the Simurgh might look quite a bit like Nabu Malikata, but might be missing a couple of traits. And this theory of inheritance might also extend towards the Djinn, given that Lilupar's bottle also shares some aesthetics with the card. I'm curious to know what you guys think and who you think this is, so let me know. Okay, it's Liben time. The Giga Chad himself. I have 2 things to share about him, neither of which started as my own observations, but I want to share them anyway because they're really cool ideas. Now, usually when Liben comes around, he gives us information on the next region, and this time he was like, nah, I fell into a hole and went stargazing, man, no Natlan for you. Which has one of 2 implications. Either Hoyoverse really wants to keep what's happening in Natlan a secret to the point where the only things we know about the place are that it's a nation of war, it has great hot springs, and the dragons apparently coexist with humans, or we're not going to Natlan next. So my lore buddy Leah pointed out that since Liben fell into a hole and stared up at the stars instead, like maybe we'll fall into the abyss or in the chasm again, kind of like what happened the last time Arataki Ito was in Liyue. And once we're there, maybe it'll be like those eternal cities in Elden Ring where like the stars are in the underground cavern thing, you know? Or maybe going underground is how we actually get to Natlan. Either way, I think this idea is super cool and it would be a really amazing fake out. Like, can you imagine going to the live stream for 5.0 and they start to do all of the teaser shots of Natlan and then all of a sudden the screen is static and you're just like underground in this a big abyssal ruined city with stars in the sky and you're like, what the heck? I thought we were underground. Where's Natlan? I think that'd be hilarious. But okay, I promised you guys 2 things, so here's the second. I do not know from whence this theory originated because I've seen at least 3 people organically come to the same conclusion at different points in time. So there's no way in heck that I am the first to pitch this idea, but here you go. Liben is actually Nibelung. Okay, yeah, this is not meant to be taken seriously, but humor me for a minute because this is actually a really funny premise. See, Liben is an anagram of Nibel, and that's basically where this theory started. But as soon as it was mentioned, I thought, yeah, you know what? If I was an undercover Dragon King trying to blend in with the humans, this is exactly what I would look like. Conspicuous as all hell, wearing a mess of things from different countries, giving out free magic star stones in exchange for random junk under the guise of being a merchant, because why would I know how money works? I'm a dragon! And it's only made funnier because the guy has Dragon Balls in his backpack. Is the theory probable? No. I'd be shocked as heck if it turned out to be true, but it's definitely my new favorite crack theory for sure. On a more serious note, Navia's name is actually really fun in terms of wordplay. Most obviously, it's the Galician word for ship or boat, which certainly fits her aesthetic, and it's also the name of a river in Spain located along the northwestern region of Galicia. But it's also the name of a genus of plants in the Bromeliaceae family, which is the one that pineapples belong to. And on the surface, you could call this just a funny coincidence for Navia's yellow color palette, but in Europe during the 1500s to the 1700s, pineapples were considered a rarity and therefore a status symbol. People would rent them out for parties to make themselves look cooler than they actually were, and they had to be hauled over via ship in the early days, so this value was quite fleeting. And yet no one really ate them despite thinking them to be the most divine fruit ever. And I still think this is a really funny thing for her to be associated with because she's definitely trying to give the impression of being very wealthy, coming from a very noble family, but she's not actually all that well off, right? Like the Spina de Rusula runs mostly on donations. It feels very fitting for her, I don't know. But if that wasn't enough, Navia is also an old Slavic word for the realm of the dead, as well as some kind of Slavic water spirit associated with death in the underworld. Sometimes this name was also given to the spirits of people who drowned prematurely, and that kind of fits her perfectly too, what with her solving a murder case around people getting dissolved into water and having a near-death experience that the water spirits of Malus and Silver saved her from. And those two definitely died prematurely. I really don't have anywhere I'm going with all of this, I just thought the wordplay of her first name deserved a little bit more attention. Her name actually has a lot of other fun little references, but these ones here are my favorites, so I'll leave some links for you to hunt down the rest on your own. Overall though, I had a pretty good time in 4.3, especially considering it was a filler patch. But I'm gonna leave you guys with one last thing while our lovely channel members roll on by. Something really cool that Fontaine has done, more so than any other region so far, is to connect all of their world quests together, so characters from one quest are connected to characters from another world quest. This applies to the Leroy quest that we recapped earlier. In this case, Leroy's quest is kind of a finale to the Rainbow Rose treasure map quests and to Freeverse, which is the quest with Penny and the talking animals. The treasure map quest tells a bunch of tragic stories about local legends like Rocky and Liam, and how they became outlaws, I guess? But it also mentions Penny's parents who went traveling and left her in the care of Rouge, who then left her in the care of some talking animals. Now, one of those talking animals was Nana, a dog that belonged to Leroy's daughter, Autumn, who also seems to be taking care of Penny. Leroy's cat also has the same name as Autumn's dog, which is kinda messed up when you remember what Leroy did. There's also a map for Athos, and Athos is Autumn's partner in crime. He apparently killed a man named Brant who ruined his business. Brant was previously the butler of Rocky Alvidson, the local legend, and apparently also swiped all of Rocky's assets, which is why Rocky went into self-exile. Athos was also friends with Penny's parents. And since Autumn cares about Penny and Penny also has Autumn's dog, it's possible that that's how they met. Also, some of you probably noticed, but Athos is also the name of a character from the book The Three Musketeers, which is actually really cool because the story in the Leroy quest parallels the story of the two musketeers from the Fontanalia Film Festival. That kind of makes Athos the third musketeer, and it also makes the Leroy quest like our permanent version of the Fontanalia Film Festival story. I probably could have put this in the appropriate sections, but consider this a bonus if you made it all the way to the end of the video. And you know what? Let me know if you actually got this far, because I'm curious. But that's all from me for right now, so thank you once again to this channel's lovely little membership havers, and another special thanks to you for watching. Take care of yourselves out there, and I'll see you next time.